therapist Kristen Jacobson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen, the anxiety therapist, and today I'm going to talk about why your vices or unhealthy habits aren't really about willpower and the surprising role your childhood plays. So a lot of us have that one vice, right? That habit or behavior that we tend to turn to when life gets really overwhelming or stressful, or if there are certain emotions that feel uncomfortable or distressing. So for some, it might be reaching for another glass of wine. For others, it might be scrolling through social media. And next thing you know, an hour flies by. For others, it might be eating that entire bag of chips late at night, or even working well past midnight because finishing, just one more thing will help you feel more accomplished. And that is even seen as that sort of revered, or can even be seen as a positive thing in our society, but it still tends to be a vice, right? It still tends to be a sort of a coping mechanism. And so these habits that we call vices, they're not random. They're strategies that we've developed to cope with difficult emotions. The interesting thing is that these vices are often connected to what pop psychology calls our inner child. So I'm not actually a huge fan of that term, but it's one that I think a lot of people are familiar with. It's a term that's actually first coined by renowned psychologist Carl Jung, who you might be familiar with. Since it's a term that has been sort of floating around in the social media world right now, that's what I'm going to use just due to its familiarity. So this really refers to emotional imprints left over from our formative years. So we develop beliefs about ourselves during childhood, and we develop certain ways that we've learned to manage feelings, whether that was modeled for us by our parents or our nervous system has sort of adapted to managing stress in certain ways. And then we carry these coping mechanisms into adulthood. And so it looks a little different in adulthood, right? But I want to talk about what these look like, how they work, and why breaking these annoying habits really isn't just a matter of willpower. So I want to get one thing straight. If you have tried and failed to stop a behavior like overeating or over drinking or doom scrolling, it's not necessarily because you lack discipline. A lot of people will take this and feel like they've failed, or they just aren't strong enough because they aren't able to stop doing a certain behavior. And these habits really, they're not so much about cravings or impulses as they are about emotional regulation. So think about it. When you feel stressed or lonely, rejected, or not good enough, your brain and your body go on high alert, and these feelings are distressing. So naturally, we're going to look for relief. So our vice is going to offer a quick escape, right? A glass of wine is going to numb that anxiety and sort of silence those self-critical thoughts. Food might soothe emotional discomfort, and this has a physiological effect. It activates the brain's reward system. Social media offers a distraction and the illusion of connection. And then workaholism provides a sense of control and worthiness. But at the root of these habits is often a core belief developed in childhood, and these might sound like, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve love unless I perform well, I can't trust anyone to take care of me, so I have to handle everything myself. And it's important to know that these are not conscious thoughts. You are not consciously having this thought and then thinking, oh, I'm going to have a glass of wine. They operate in the background, in the subconscious, but they still affect how we respond to stress. So this is where the inner child concept comes into play. During childhood, we all develop these emotional patterns based on how we were treated and what we experienced. And this isn't about like blaming our parents or blaming our situation or other people, but rather exploring our own interpretations of those relationships and experiences. So if you grew up in an environment where your feelings were dismissed or ignored, you might have learned to, push them down. And then as adult, overeating or over drinking might become a way to numb those emotions that you're not used to expressing. Let's say you were praised only when you achieved something. then work or accomplishments might feel like the only way to feel worthy. And so when life feels uncertain, you might kind of double down on productivity to avoid feeling like you're not enough, not good enough. If your childhood was chaotic and unpredictable, you might turn to vices like social media or binge watching TV for the soothing feeling of distraction from the present moment. And so these coping mechanisms start early because kids don't have the skills to manage overwhelming emotions on their own, right? And instead, they rely on those behaviors that bring some sort of relief. And as a kid, that's throwing a tantrum, withdrawing, seeking external validation. But over time, these behaviors evolve into the adult habits that I was talking about above. So why do these vices stick? Your brain is wired to keep you safe and comfortable. So that is really the job of your subconscious, right? To keep you safe and comfortable. So when you engage in a behavior that helps you avoid pain, whether that's physical or emotional, your brain releases dopamine. And this is a neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure. So dopamine doesn't just make you feel good, it also reinforces the behavior, creating this loop. So you have the trigger, let's say you're feeling stressed or unworthy. Then you have the behavior, you scroll through Instagram or you pour a drink, and then you have the reward. Dopamine floods your system and offers this temporary relief. So over time, this loop becomes hardwired. And so you're not just fighting a habit, you're actually fighting your brain's reward system. And so this is why willpower alone just really isn't enough. It's like you're trying to turn off a smoke alarm without actually putting out the fire. So I want to provide some examples of how this might show up in real life. So let's take Sarah, for example. She's a 35-year-old accountant. She's struggled with overeating, especially at night. And she was really stuck in this cycle of guilt and shame, convinced she just needed more self-control, right? Because that's typically what we think. So through our work together, Sarah realized that her overeating wasn't really about the food. It was about comfort and the ability to let go. And growing up, her parents had been really critical and dismissive. And so as a kid, she often felt unlovable and would turn to snacks for that solace. So even as an adult, those feelings of inadequacy lingered. And after a tough day at work, or, if her boss criticized a presentation, she would reach for those double stuffed Oreos or that mint chocolate chip ice cream. And in that moment, her brain associated food with safety. But this is a habit that really started in her childhood experience of finding comfort in eating. So by recognizing the connection to her inner child, Sarah started working on having more self-compassion. She was able to name her emotions instead of avoid them, and slowly replaced her habit of eating with other healthier, more productive, soothing activities like journaling or FaceTiming with a friend. Another example is Jake. He's a 42-year-old project manager. He often found himself working, 60 to 70 hours a week, told himself he was just ambitious, but really deep down, Jake felt like he constantly had to prove his worth. And growing up, Jake's father was very critical and emotionally distant. And so the only time Jake got praise was when he excelled in school or sports. And this taught him that success equaled love and validation. So fast forward to adulthood, Jake's overworking wasn't really about his love of his job. It was about avoiding those feelings of inadequacy. And if he slowed down, those old feelings or old beliefs of not being good enough rose to the surface. So through our work together, Jake was able to start challenging this belief by taking some small steps to set boundaries at work and really kind of hone in on his own needs. And he also reminded himself that his worth wasn't tied to his output, which really helped him start breaking the overworking habit. Now, I share these two cases. Obviously, names and details have been changed to preserve patient confidentiality, but I just wanted to give you an illustration of this sort of in a practical sense. So how do you start untangling your vices? If willpower isn't the answer, then what is? Really, it starts with curiosity and compassion. So instead of beating yourself up for a habit, ask, what am I trying to avoid feeling right now? Or what belief about myself might be driving this behavior. And again, it's not about blaming your childhood. It's really just about understanding how these early patterns shaped your responses to stress, or how your nervous system is responding to stress, and then recognizing that you can create new patterns now. So I wanted to share a few steps to get started. Number one is to name the feeling. So pause and identify what you're feeling in the moment. Even just naming your emotion can reduce its intensity. If you sign up for my freebie, How to Stop Overthinking, which is linked below, I have a feelings wheel in there. And this is a great resource to get started if you need some help identifying your emotions. So be sure to find that link below. Number two, you trace it back. So consider when you first started to cope in this way, what experiences or beliefs might have been fueling that habit. Number three is to find alternatives. So experiment with healthier ways to soothe yourself, like maybe taking a hot bath or journaling or connecting with a friend. And then four is to get support. So like I said, a lot of these things are operating in your subconscious. So you might need another person to help bring that belief or sort of that inner child wound to the surface. And therapy can really be a game changer for that, for uncovering and addressing those deeper beliefs. And I just want to take a moment to mention that if someone is really struggling with addiction, there's an additional physiological component to that, that your body is addicted to the substance. So that might require treatment above and beyond what I'm mentioning. But these are just more vices, right? More kind of unhealthy coping mechanisms, if you will. So lastly, just remember that change isn't instant, and that's okay, right? These habits that you've developed took years and sometimes even decades to form. So undoing them isn't like flipping a switch. It's about slowly rewiring your brain and learning to sit with those uncomfortable emotions, which is referred to as distress tolerance. And the good news is your brain is incredibly adaptable. So through awareness, practice, and support, you can create new habits that really serve you better. So the next time you find yourself reaching for your vice of choice, just remember it's not a moral failing. It's really just a survival strategy that you learned long ago. And just like you learned it, you can unlearn it. So I hope you found this video helpful. I would love to learn about your own vices. I've had my vices. There's nothing to be ashamed about, nothing to be embarrassed about. I think if we share our experiences with each other, then it just kind of normalizes it and it can create a safe space that people can use to heal and, have some more productive ways of coping in their lives. I will talk to you all next week.